What's up YouTube? My name's Zach, I'm here with Bus Voyage, and today we're talking about the best insulations for your conversion vehicle. So before we get started, I just want to say real quick, insulation can be dangerous, so make sure that you're following all the necessary safety precautions, you're reading the documentation, and you have the necessary safety equipment, just because depending what you're using, if it's spray foam or fiberglass or something like that, it can be dangerous. So before we talk about insulation, the first thing we need to talk about is R values. R values are a system that have been designed to determine how insulative a material is. So with the materials we'll talk about today, R values will range anywhere from roughly R3 per inch to R7. And so, as I mentioned, what that basically means is how well does this material do at stopping energy from getting through it. And so it's really important that when we're talking about R values, we talk about R values per inch. And the reason this is so we can have a fair comparison. So for example, a lot of times you might see fiberglass that's rated at R15. And although that seems awesome, the reason this is because it's 5-inch thick fiberglass. In reality, fiberglass actually has an R value of 3.2, which is not that good in comparison. So we'll make sure we keep that in mind, so we're always having fair comparisons moving forward. So when it comes to insulation, there are three main types of insulation I want to talk about today. We've got your rigid foam boards, we've got your bats, and we've got your spray foam. So if you're like me, you probably had no idea what a bat was. So I went ahead and Googled it. And according to Google, a bat is a piece of felted material used for lining or insulating items such as quilts and sleeping bags. So there you go, learn something new every day. So let's get into it. So we're gonna start first with rigid foam boards. So when it comes to rigid foam boards, the first one I want to talk about is EPS. Now, EPS has an R value of 3.9, and again, that's 3.9 per inch, which honestly is not too good. The biggest draw to EPS is that it's cheap. However, EPS is not moisture proof, and it doesn't cover the cracks. This is something I should probably touch on. So when I say cover the cracks, what I'm talking about is, when you're putting up insulation, when you're using a rigid foam board, you're innately going to have cracks in between the pieces of board you're putting down. Now, with bats, it's more of a felt-like material, like fiberglass. And so it's something that you can, kind of stuff into hard-to-reach places, so it'll kind of cover the cracks. And then there's spray foam, which will really cover the cracks. I mean, it expands, so we'll get more to that in a second, but just so you have some context of what I'm talking about when I say cover the cracks, your rigid foam boards are not going to cover the cracks at all. So overall, EPS would not be my first choice. Next, we have XPS. Now, XPS has an R value of 5.0. On top of that, XPS is also moisture proof. Now, unfortunately, XPS is a little bit more expensive. Thirdly, for our rigid foam boards, we have polyiso. Now, polyiso is going to have a whopping R value of 6.0. It's going to be the best of all of our rigid foam boards. It's also going to be a little bit more expensive than XPS, making it pretty pricey. It's going to be moisture proof, and then once again, being a rigid foam board is not going to cover the cracks. Now, the biggest backdraw to polyiso is that at low temperatures, its R value is actually going to drop significantly, which is kind of a big setback if you plan on being anywhere cold. Okay, so now that we've talked about our rigid foam boards, let's talk about the bats. So the one that I already mentioned is fiberglass. So fiberglass, like I said, has an R value of 3.2. On top of that, it's not moisture proof. It'll kind of cover the cracks, but at least it's cheap. However, there's a couple other drawbacks of fiberglass we should talk about. First of all, it's itchy. And second of all, it can be dangerous if not used correctly. If inhaled or gotten in the eyes, it can be really bad for you. So overall, I would not recommend fiberglass. The next bat we'll talk about is rock wool. So rock wool has an R value of 4.3. On top of that, again, being a bat, it'll kind of cover the cracks. However, it's not moisture proof. It's still itchy, kind of like fiberglass, and it can actually be more expensive than fiberglass. So it's an all right choice. After rock wool, we have sheep's wool. Now, sheep's wool has an R value of 3.5 to 4. It's not moisture proof. However, from what I've read, it does handle moisture really well, meaning that it's probably not going to grow mold, where something like fiberglass could actually grow mold if moisture gets in and just sits there. So something to consider. On top of that, sheep's wool is moderately priced, and a big benefit to it is that it's actually really good for the planet. It's a highly sustainable form of insulation, and so that's definitely something to consider when outfitting a bus or a van. So the third type of insulation that I wanted to talk about today is Sprayfoam. Now, I really like Sprayfoam. So Sprayfoam is gonna have a whopping R value of 6.5 to 7.0. It's going to be expensive. However, two of the big benefits are that it's moisture proof and it'll completely cover the cracks. And the reason that is with Sprayfoam, you can spray it into any area or surface and it'll expand and cover the whole area, which is pretty awesome. Especially if you plan to go to some pretty extreme climates, it's definitely gonna give you the most insulation over anything else. There's also some downsides to Sprayfoam that we should definitely talk about. So first of all, it's messy. I mean, when you're spraying that stuff, it kind of just goes everywhere, which means I would probably recommend either cut up some trash bags or maybe get some plastic wrap and just cover everything in your vehicle. This will save a lot of trouble later, because otherwise you're gonna be going through and cleaning spray foam off of all your windows and your floors, and just, it can be a real mess. The other big downside to spray foam is that it is expensive. Spray foam can cost upwards of $300 or $400 for, you know, a small bus or van. And if you're converting a full bus, well now, man, you might be talking $600 or $700. The worst of the downsides to spray foam is that it can actually be dangerous. So it's really important that when applying spray foam, you've read all the proper documentation, you have all the correct safety equipment, and you just generally know what you're doing. So when you're using spray foam, two chemicals get mixed together, which form spray foam as we see it. And in the process, it off-gasses organic vapors, formaldehyde, and actually small particulates. And so for this reason, it's very important that you have a respirator that's rated to P100, as well as covers organic vapors and formaldehyde. So I'll go ahead and link the mask I used in the description below if you're curious. On top of the mask or the respirator, you're also going to want proper goggles, gloves, and a full body covering just to make sure that no skin is exposed. So once again, I'll go ahead and link all the equipment that I used in the description below, so that if you're curious or just want to find, you know, an easy to find option, it's all right there. So before we go any further, if you're new to the channel, here at Bus Voyage, we make videos about converting used school buses into epic tiny homes. We give a few tips along the way and just allow you to follow our adventures. So if you're converting one of your own or just want to follow along, feel free to hit the subscribe button and the bell down below. Well, now that we've talked about different materials and the different properties of them, let's talk about what's best. So I know I kind of touched on this already, but the first thing is floors. So when it comes to flooring, I would definitely recommend using a rigid foam board. And the reason for this is that rigid foam board is not easily condensed and it'll give you an even surface to walk on. So although spray foam might have a higher R value, it's not super fun to walk on spray foam unless you're cutting it all to be even, which can be kind of a pain. And so specifically of the rigid foam boards, the one that I would recommend is XPS. Now the reason for this is that it has a decent R value, it's moisture proof, and unlike polyiso, it's gonna have a consistent R value across all temperature ranges. In my mind, this is a big benefit, considering I like to go places like Alaska and places that'll get pretty cold. So when it comes to walls and ceiling, I have a couple different things I would recommend. I think most of the time I would probably recommend spray foam. Now I say this because spray foam has an amazing R value, it's moisture proof, and it covers the cracks, which is a huge benefit. It will optimize the amount of space that's insulated and just overall retain more of that energy in your bus, retain the heat in your bus, or retain the cool if you're in a hot place like Arizona. Now, as I mentioned, there definitely are drawbacks to using spray foam. It is messy, it's expensive, and most of all, it is dangerous. So if you're not up for the challenge, which I completely understand, the next thing that I would recommend is probably sheep's wool. Especially if you don't plan on going to too many extreme climates, sheep's wool could actually be an awesome option. So although sheep's wool only has an R value of 3.5 to 4, it's going to be easy to install, it's going to give you a decent R value, it's going to handle moisture well, and overall just be a good product. So if you're looking for something simple to install and maybe you're staying just in, you know, staying around your hometown, I think sheep's wool is a great option. Cool. Well, that's it for today. That's everything I have on insulation. If you enjoyed it, go ahead and hit the like button. If you want to see more videos like this, you can hit the subscribe button and the bell down below. We post new videos every Wednesday. On top of that, you can follow us on Instagram at Bus Voyage Builds. All right, we'll see you next week.